Welcome to the Better Workday podcast, hosted by Niamh Moynihan. Each week, Niamh shares tips, tricks, and insights to help you have a better workday. Teams, Slack, emails, with so many tools we can use to communicate, sometimes the how or the why we should communicate can get a bit jumbled. Niamh, in today's hybrid, remote, or mixed work environments, what can we do to make sure we are communicating effectively?
Hello, and welcome back to the Better Workday podcast. You wouldn't know this, but this is take 3 of me trying to record this today. Not because there have been any interruptions or distractions per se, but because I've been struggling how to communicate what it is I want to talk about. And what's interesting about that is I want to talk about communication. So, because I tried to keep these episodes relatively short, I was trying to figure out the best way to do the intro and to cover things off so that you can get some practical ideas without me going on for too long. And isn't it gas that that's one of the problems that we have with communication today, trying to strike that balance with quality of information, sending a really good communication and making sure that it's still going to hold the attention of our audience and that people aren't going to skip through it or skip over it. And I find this topic comes up time and time again. How do we communicate more effectively? And I do know that the rise of hybrid and remote working has brought in a new mix to it, but I don't think that's the only element to consider. So today I want to cover a few different ideas and maybe spark a little bit of conversation on your side, or maybe encourage you to make a simple change to improve the way that you work and improve the way that you communicate. So the first one for me, and I'm looking over at my board here now if you're watching, is I think that tools like Teams and Slack almost make it too easy to communicate sometimes. So I know that the people who have designed and work on these tools try really hard to create a great user experience, and I appreciate that. I definitely enjoy using some tools. They're very easy to use, and the frictionless makes it pleasurable to use them. But sometimes it's so easy, it's almost without thought. So I would send messages without even thinking about it. And I know now I'm not the only person. So I would find that at the end of a conversation, I have started it without any clear point. I found my way along the way, and then I ended up saying, sure, will we just jump on a call? And part of that reason is I just kept hitting send before I thought about it. So I wonder, do tools like this and their ease of use cause a rise of unnecessary chit chat? And I'm not talking about the good social conversations that we have that help combat things like loneliness, like I spoke about a few weeks ago. I just mean the mindless, half thought conversations that could be avoided if you had to pause for 5 or 10 seconds before that message went out. And I think that was probably one of the benefits when you had to send communications by post, or when things were a little bit more clunky on the electronic side, because you almost had a barrier to that default send and you had to think twice or at least review. So that's food for thought. On my side, I am trying to let messages sit before I send, even if it only seems like a short one, just to make sure that I'm not on autopilot all of the day. And then with that, then continuing on with this whole ease of communication, AI is practically writing my emails for me these days. It's finishing my sentences, it's suggesting the next sentence, it's phrasing things that I want to say. And while it's helpful, I mean, especially helpful in terms of grammar, spelling, and clarity, things like breaking up sentences into two or three, I find that really helpful. But it's also almost putting words in my mouth. And again, taking the thought and intention away from me in terms of what it is I want to say, what tone I want to give across, what message I want to convey and how I want the other person to feel. And so it's this use of technology that, on the one hand, is very, very helpful, but on the other hand, can, I suppose, take that intentionality out of communication that concerns me. So look, on my side, I know that I have tried all the AI tools, well, not all of them, but I've tried a lot of them to help improve things like communication and other areas of the business. But for some of them, I am going back to their basic settings and putting a lot of the work back in myself, because look, it might take me a couple of extra minutes, but at least I feel like I own that message then when I'm sending it out. And I'd be curious now if any of you disagree with that, or if you have another experience, if you feel that AI is making you a better communicator in terms of the intention, the tone, and the way that you want to convey your message to other people. So that was the second thing for me. And then the third one. Now, this one I got as an idea from a LinkedIn post on how to write LinkedIn posts, which was, of course, what you see an awful lot of on LinkedIn these days. And one of the ideas was only to have paragraphs of max 2 sentences, and then to break them up because people wouldn't read it if it was longer. And I just sat back and thought, wow, like on the one hand, we want a long post, let's say on LinkedIn, for example. But on the other hand, we're saying, well, people won't actually read it unless you chunk it down into 2 sentences. And that goes back then into the workplace as this, I suppose, dilemma. Will I send a big, long, detailed, thought out email, which is multiple paragraphs, or will I send those snappy, almost autopilot short messages, right? Which one is better? So initially, I'm saying I want to reduce that quick, short communication. But on the other hand, there's a very real worry that if I send a detailed email, will anyone read it? Like, will they just skim over it? And then all the work that I've put in is a waste, and I'm going to have to re-communicate it anyway. When I'm delivering workshops and when I'm talking to people about their communication plan with different stakeholders, this comes up a lot. They want to convey the information. They want to make sure that they're sending over everything that the other person needs to know to understand what's going on, but they have a real fear that it won't be read. And I suppose at the same time, they don't read emails themselves because, look, inboxes are very full. People are time poor at work, being pulled from one meeting to another, from one task to another. And so, even if you have the best intentions to pay a lot of attention to those messages, it's likely that you don't. So, what do we do? Like, do we succumb to this recommendation of 2 sentence paragraphs? Do we default only to Teams? Do we commit to spending longer reading email messages and actually putting a block in the calendar for reading email? Like, I know so many people who commit to blocks of time for focus time for deep work, and I'm a big advocate of that. But don't allow the same amount of time for reading email and for sending emails. And when you consider that's how most people communicate with others and get things done, and make sure that people are informed and move projects forward and all those things, I'm like, why doesn't that get the same priority in your calendar? Why doesn't that get space? And would that be helpful? Because otherwise, I just feel like communication is very fragmented. Like you sent one email and then that's not read. So you follow up with a few Teams messages, and then you do redirect them back to the email and then another Teams message. And then you end up having a meeting just to make sure everyone's on the same page, which is where we get to the biggest problem in my mind, that people come together for a live interactive meeting to have the conversation real time. And a lot of people are multitasking. They are keeping an eye out for a message, or they're watching the notifications pop up, or they are checking their phone. And I've done this, or they're writing things in their notepad. And after all that effort to come together and to truly understand what the message is or to do what needs to be done, half of the people are checked out, even though they're in attendance. So it seems like it's a bit of a dire situation, but I have to remind myself that we've had these problems before. So I first started working in a desk-based role in 2007, and from day one, I've always worked with distributed teams. Okay, in every company I've ever worked in, there have been people in other places that I've had to communicate with throughout the working day. So whether that was in the UK, in another part of Ireland, in India, Australia, the States, long before everyone was remote or hybrid working, there was distributed teams. And so these teams, well, we had to figure out a way to communicate efficiently. We had to make sure that the work got done. And there certainly weren't as many meetings and that email volume that there is today. And when I thought about it, one of the big differences that I've seen over the last number of years is not necessarily just the adoption of tech, it's also the flexibility or the growth of people's roles. So in the past, perhaps I would have been responsible for, we'll say, following up on invoices. Maybe that was my main job. So my job was to follow up on invoices. And so most of my communication would have been on that topic. But now I'll have that job, but I'll also be asked to maybe be involved on a particular transformation project, and I'll be asked to be involved in a sustainability project. And then perhaps I'll be brought into something else by IT. And all of a sudden, my inbox and my Teams and my meetings are full of a wide array of different conversations that I need to keep on top of all the time. And so when we're trying to juggle all of those balls, it's easy for us to, use the frictionless MS Teams just to get our thoughts out there before we forget them, because there's so much to remember. Or it's easy to, get frustrated that people haven't read an email, so to try to pull them into a meeting. And then, of course, to be the one that, despite your best effort, you're off working on something else. So I do think it's a combination of, shorter attention spans, which is prevalent in general, just because of our adoption of social media and short form content. So there's that piece, plus the fact that these tools are allowing us to communicate almost too easily. And also, I think this, I suppose, widening of roles, that people have even more to talk about, even more to learn, even more to be informed on, which just causes a higher volume of communication. So, what to do? What to do about all of that? Well, I think that there are a few practical things that all of us can do, and I've alluded to some of them today because I have started doing them myself. So, the first is, on those tools that are so easy to use, you have a message sent before you think twice. I have started to try to think twice and to slow that down and to consider the person on the other side. Am I saying something to them for their sake or for my sake? And if it's for my sake, can it wait? The second thing is, when it comes to the email piece, knowing that's, I suppose, the better place for longer form communication. If you want to share a lot of information, and perhaps attachments, details, and stuff like that, it's really allotting the time to email or to communicating with others in that way, and blocking out time in your calendar just like you would your most important work. Now, you might not reply to emails as quickly, but at least when you do reply to them, you'll have read them and you'll have read them properly. And I think that is more valuable in the long term. And then when it comes to the meetings, one of my best tips is always to sit in your chair and to push yourself back so that your fingers can't reach the keyboard. And then you're less likely to get distracted. Because if you are more present in the meeting, then you'll be a better listener, a better contributor, and a better meeting facilitator. So we're winning all around. But the final thing is really around the role piece. And this is more one for management and for senior leaders, to take a look at your teams and the diversity of work that they have on their plates. And is it, enough to create variety, interest, and paths for growth? Or is it just that little bit too much, which is actually causing confusion and, conflict in terms of what's a priority and where they should be focusing their attention? And look, that's a fine balance, and it has to be reviewed regularly. But I think now is the perfect opportunity to do it. Okay, that's from me. That's my communication chat. If you have any questions or comments on this, I would love to hear from you. You can find my contact details in the show notes. Until next time, stay well and have a better workday.
Thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. The Better Workday podcast is about helping you have a better workday. So we'd love to hear your thoughts and questions. You can find our social media details as well as any references from this episode in the show notes.